Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion where we're going to be talking about how Appdome can protect customer identity in mobile. I'm Alan Bavosa, VP of Security Products at Appdome, the one and only AI native platform to protect mobile businesses globally. I'm joined by two of Appdome's pioneers, Tom Tovar, Appdome's co-creator and CEO, and Gil Hartman, our very first engineer and now our field CTO. Tom brings the business vision and product strategy behind Appdome, while Gil leads our technical innovation and works directly with customers and partners to solve tough problems in the mobile security and fraud space. Together, they'll unpack the vision and mechanics behind our newest innovation, IDAnchor. Welcome, Tom and Gil. Let's get right to it. So, customer identity protection has been the missing link in closing the loop on mobile fraud. What are the biggest pain points in mobile fraud today, and how does IDAnchor solve them? Tom?
Well, I think your first statement was spot on in that customer identity has always been a function of workflows. You bring a user into an application experience or into an application context, you create the identity, or the user creates the identity and follows a certain workflow to create an account inside of an application, whether that's a mobile app or web app or whatnot. And then when the user returns to the application, their identity is verified against the stored elements of that identity to form a match. And if a match exists, the user is granted access. And if a match doesn't exist, then the user is not granted access. But pretty much it exists, within that authentication, creation and authentication construct, and that's it. The challenge with that model has always been that identity assertions happen throughout an application lifecycle, not just at login. Identity assertions happen, certainly at, sign up, at sign in for sure, but they also happen in engagement in the application, payment and purchasing within an application, social interaction with an application. Any activity within an application has an implied identity assertion associated with it. So you have this notion that customer identity doesn't just exist at the front end. It exists throughout the session, if you will, and throughout the sessions or the user's overall lifetime engagement with that application. The other challenge that happens is that the source inputs for identity and identity verification and access management and so forth aren't validated and checked inside of a mobile application or application in general. So the reality is that you can literally have anybody signing into anything, as long as they can represent themselves in that assertion with the proper face, with the proper username, with the proper password, or what have you. And as we all know, there's all kinds of technologies that allow all of those things to be spoofed. And because of that, pretty much these models that are used to create, manage, validate identities are really at risk. So I think customer identity protection is a new layer in an application that says that, number one, we should verify the source inputs of all of the identity assertions. And number two, we should have a continuous verification of that identity throughout the life cycle of the application. So if we solve those two things, I think we can preserve our investment in identity access management, customer identity and access management, identity verification, biometric auth, all the things that we rely on today to grant or deny users entry into a mobile app. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just give like an example. Like we have IDFA and GID and IDFV and all these identities that are supposed to help and identify, but they can be reset, they can be spoofed, and they can't really be like controlled. And all these SDK-based fingerprinting solutions, they can always be bypassed. Like we've looked at them, and they're always like easily bypassed if you do device cloning, if you do emulator farms, if you do all those stuff. So we really worked at Appdome to look from like the tech level, from the cyber level, and make sure that the solutions that we have in the market are different than what we do, because we are really coming at it not like connecting the cyber world with the identity world, and just using all the stuff that we learned on cyber and protection and security, and making sure that the signals that we get are really secure signals and signals that you can trust and that can't be spoofed. So I think that's like the big change that we're adding on here.
Yeah, wow, that's an incredibly important piece of the fraud puzzle. Can you guys elaborate on specific pain points that each of these important market segments, like customer identity and access management and identity verification, what are some of the specific pain points that each of these markets face that are sort of kind of unsolvable because they don't have access to the source?
Yeah. Well, I'll cover the biometric piece, and maybe Gil can cover kind of the device binding and application binding kind of piece.
Sure.
So, from a biometric authentication perspective, the reality is, with the rise of AI and all, new methods of creating synthetic identities and synthetic faces and so forth, um, there is a myriad of techniques out on the market today, gray market products as well as black market products, and maybe even some white market products, classic market products that allow the biometric authentication process to be interfered with. Whether that is intercepting the API call from the application to the camera, or substituting the camera with a virtual camera, or injecting video streams, or manipulating memory using direct memory access attacks, buffer overwrites, what have you, or simply just spoofing the signal between an external process and an application, just kind of getting in the middle of it and essentially returning to an application a success signal as opposed to a failure signal. There's a myriad number of ways that can be used to basically create a bypass to biometric authentication. I think if you're building or using any kind of biometric authentication, whether it's local on the device for unlock or autofill, or it's a third-party solution for identity verification or CIAM or anything like that, if you're not concerned about deepfakes and biometric bypass, you're not in the present world. So I think all of these methods right now don't really have a mechanism to detect when substitutions, impersonations, or manipulation happens, in part because they're initialized too late in the workflow, but also because once that external service is called, the attacker's already staged their attack. They're already present in the flow or in the app or in the operating system. So it's kind of a is kind of game over at that point. So I think this notion of having a perimeter defense around biometric authentication, to send the application or the authentication service threat signals for when those things happen, when those threats are present, is a very critical component to ensuring valid, true signal clarity in that authentication process. So I'd say that to me is one of the biggest places where things are at risk. So Gil, why don't you take the binding question?
Yeah, so I think it's pretty hard to do device binding this world, like, because Apple and Google basically said this is something that we do not want people to allow to be able to bind the device. And it's not like Appdome is doing anything illegal. Appdome's using just like the public APIs and everything that's public knowledge, and we're doing everything above the ground. But with our device ID, we're basically giving the ability to like bind the device and just basically tell the user, is this you? And that when somebody is going to try and log in from a different device, then we will give the application owner the ability to challenge him and say, is that you? Are you really now using a different device, or is it somebody else trying to to do it. And once we do that, and we give that tool to the application owner, to the business owner, is that you, is it you using it again? Are you bind it to the device and only trigger it when you're using it on a different device? I think that's just a lot of power and lets you help with your identity and your fraud and a lot of other stuff that can be used.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think to add to that, one of the things I would say is in the context of a biometric, bypass attack, the user most likely is not going to, knock you on your head and take your device. The attacker is most likely going to use a different device. So you can actually combine the 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 device identity in the context of our new IDAnchor. You can combine the device identity with the threat signal for whether there's a substitute camera or a deepfake injection or whatnot, and actually improve the fidelity of detecting deep fakes, because not only are you looking at the flow and the process of whether you have process integrity for the authentication moment or activity, but you're also looking at the device integrity, whether there's a separate or impersonated or whatnot device at the same time. Combining those two things together is a very, very, very powerful way of determining if, what's happening inside your application is real or Memorex, as they used to say, real or fake. So
What are some of the regulatory type of things that IDAnchor can help you solve or comply with?
yeah, so as it turns out, there's quite a number of new laws and regulations that have come out in all kinds of countries, including the Philippines and Brazil and others, that where identity is center stage, things like device binding center stage and things like that. So I think certainly as AI becomes more prevalent and as a result scams become more prevalent in the mobile economy, you're going to find, different geographies stepping forward and actually mandating that certainly banks and payment applications, commerce class applications, and so forth do more to ensure that it's the real user who is signing into mobile applications, and not somebody who's not them signing into those applications, signing into those accounts, and so forth. And Gil's been working with some of our Philippine customers. I don't know if you want to comment on that, kind of the regulatory landscape out there, but there's definitely, I think, going to be more and more and more of this in the next, 2 to 3 years. I think it's just,
Yeah, so I think we've seen in Brazil and we've seen in other countries. Mexico, I think, is coming on soon, and definitely Philippines came out with the FASA compliance, which we've had multiple customers asked us about it. And basically, the FASA compliance, for example, it's asking or mandating financial institutions to be able to track who the person is using, and basically have a lot of protections, network level protections and jailbreak and root protections and scripting and automation protections, but also anything around screen sharing and remote desktop. And a big part of that, which is stuff that Appdome covers, but the big thing is about fingerprinting and knowing who the user is using and making sure that nobody is spoofing. And those are stuff that the regulatory is asking the bank, and not asking, mandating the banks to take advantage. And I think Appdome, IDAnchor, and not only IDAnchor combined with Appdome's fraud and security features, that's just like an out of the box solution for anything that you need to comply to.
yeah, I think
So
definitely the law there is covering things specifically like device binding, keeping a list of banned devices and things of that nature. So it's not just knowing the good guys, it's knowing the bad guys. So I think we're going to see more and more of this. And it means that IDAnchor is perfect for not only regulatory compliance in that regard, but again, all fraud and ATO type attacks. So
So, we all know Appdome. We've been in the mobile apps, application security space for years, and then API protection and mobile bot protection, and so now identity. So, Tom, why don't you talk a little bit about why identity, why now? What are some of the things that you heard in the market from customers, and essentially what led to the creation of IDAnchor and this market customer identity protection segment.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very exciting time for us because identity is like the Wild West right now with deepfakes and all kinds of other challenges that are going on in that sphere. So initially, our customers brought us into the identity space because they were getting a lot of bypasses to biometric authentication and identity verification. So as you guys know, we came up with a whole range of deepfake detections and things of that nature to really support the identity market and the identity use case within our customer base. But along with that, our customer said, "Okay, but boy, it would really be great to know if the deep fakes and other identity-based attacks are happening on the same device or on a malicious device. Is there something that you can do to give us a device identifier or an identity scheme where that's again persistent, that's immutable, that doesn't go away?" That we can use to detect whether or not there's a substitute entity that's being used in the identity assertion. And I thought about that for a bit, and it hit me. And I sort of realized that up until that point, Appdome was able to detect, a deep fake or fraud or malware or some other mechanism as long as there was a technical implementation for that attack vector. We had not yet offered a solution to the market, no one had, that dealt with fraud when there was otherwise no fraud signal available, when there was no attack present. And so I started calling it low-tech fraud. I think you referred to it earlier, where someone that you knew before, might have had your credentials, and then you're no longer with that person, or they're no longer in your life, but they still have your credentials. And so what happens, and how do you stop that low-tech fraud? And so we started talking with the engineering team. We started looking at obviously what's available in the operating system, realizing that most of what's out there is ephemeral and resettable and so forth. And we started to come up with this notion of IDAnchor and the certificate-based or identity-based kind of chain of trust that we use today. And we went back to our customers and we said, "What do you think about this?" And they were just like, aha, like, wow, like blown away. Like, because we didn't just come back to them with a better device binding. Like, we didn't come back to them and say, "Oh, yeah, we can do device binding better than anybody else." We came back to them and we said, "We're going to give you a chain of trust. In fact, as we think about it, you are the point of origin, you are the root of the customer identity in your business. And so we're gonna fingerprint that entire value chain." So what we really gave them is a living digital fingerprint. So as new releases are released, as new installs are made, they can track the identity, the source of the identity assertion over the life of the customer. They know how many installs average do they get per every release. They know whether users are deleting the app and reinstalling the app, things of that nature, and how does that impact the identity assertions. And they also know when the fakes are inserted in that process to actually break the chain of trust and signal to them threats. So on the one hand, it's a natural extension of what we've been doing. I think it's part of our strategy to always add more and better defenses to the Appdome platform. But on the other hand, it's really solving a huge, huge, huge area in the mobile economy right now, which is how do you ensure that the identity assertion that's being made is actually true and authentic? And I think IDAnchor, I know that IDAnchor is the perfect building block to solve that problem and solve it for good. And so I'm very excited about that, where we are right now.
Yeah,
And
great.
and because Appdome sits in the build process, right? We're kind of uniquely positioned
We
to be
are.
able to offer
We
this
are.
capability.
I think unlike an SDK-based product or something like that, which is not part of the build pipeline, I think it's impossible for them to do something like this. I think also because we're a service and we can keep on the back end the true device attribute and the true device identity, and for every single install of every single application, Appdome application on the planet. I think we're just uniquely situated not only to provide this both from a code implementation standpoint, letting AI build it into the app without codes or SDKs, but also as a service standpoint, back, calling back to Appdome to say, is this the real device or not, and get that attestation. So I do think we're uniquely positioned for this, and even down the road, uniquely positioned to keep list of devices that bad actors use and offer that as part of our service as well. So it's a real turning point for us. And I think our customers can expect us to bring IDAnchor into the application context and into the API and bot defense context, along with just having it as a standalone service as well. So I think there's a way of bringing all of these things into intertwined with one another to just improve the overall efficacy and richness of the offering that we provide.
And it really is through the life cycle of the app's entire life cycle, right? From the origination point all the way through to app usage, and really looking at every interaction point that users have with the app,
Well,
right? Because
there's definitely malware out there that can interrupt a session or insert itself in a session and change, transaction modalities or change recipients of payments and things of that nature. So because those threats exist, it starts to reveal the fact that identity is asserted in every interaction, every engagement between a user and an application. That identity notion doesn't just exist at sign in and log in. And a successful login or a successful authentication does not mean you have a trusted session. So you have to be able to test and interrogate the identity assertion throughout the life cycle of the app. If you're not interrogating the identity assertion, then you're leaving yourself open. Yes, it's kind of like the Trojan horse. Yes, you've let something through the gate, but once it's in the gate, inside the gate, it can do whatever it wants. So I think history has taught us, and certainly proper cybersecurity best practices have taught us that you need a layered defense. And as part of that, in my mind, you need to interrogate the source of the identity assertion throughout the life cycle of the app. There's just no way around it.
talk a little bit about the offering itself.
Yeah, so IDAnchor itself is part of the Appdome platform. So the benefit of being part of the Appdome platform is it's AI codes the outcome into the application. So just like everything else, there's no code to contend with, no SDK to implement, or anything like that. The user follows the same user experience they do for all of our other defenses. They turn on the defense itself, they configure the outcome that they want, and they initiate the build command, and the system builds everything. Uh, the product is comprised of three main components. One is the multi-layered fingerprint. So again, workspace, application, install, and device fingerprints, which live with the user. So they can be used to bind the user to that chain of trust to detect if any part of that chain of trust is substituted or impersonated or broken in any way. The second part of the product is threat signals, and that part I'm really proud about because Gil led a huge re-architecture of Appdome recently that essentially allows our customers to embed IDAnchor with all of our detection logic, all of our threat signals. So you can configure your IDAnchor policy to include up to 400 different unique threat signals. So if you want to combine the fingerprint analysis with geofraud or geolocation spoofing, deepfake detection, ATO detection, social engineering detection, things like phishing and remote desktop scams or IT scams or any of those kinds of things, as well as any of the other defenses and detections that we offer. You can combine the threat signals with IDAnchor. And then the third part is the true device attributes that we give as part of every payload that's sent with the IDAnchor fingerprint. So you'll always know exactly what the device is that's making the identity assertion. So these three components together can be configured in any manner that you want. Along with that, within the IDAnchor fingerprints, we do tell you if there's any operating system identifier manipulation. So if anybody's manipulating the GAID or IDFA or vendor IDs or anything like that, and we can detect any attempt to bypass or manipulate our own fingerprints within the application. So that's the product. Today, it's embodied within the application. The application consumes the outputs and then uses those to design whatever workflows the developer wants to use. If you get a chance to come visit us at Black Hat, we'd love to show you a demo of IDAnchor. Just stop by booth number 4746 and learn more about it.